Hello, and welcome to today's ACM SIGSOFT webinar. This webcast is part of ACM SIGSOFT's commitment to provide value to its current and future members. The ACM SIGSOFT webinar series features speakers from the Future of Software Engineering track at the International Conference of Software Engineering, as well as select keynote speakers and distinguished paper authors. I am Pekka Abrahamsson, Professor of Software Engineering at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. Before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items shown on the slide in front of you. First, the slides will advance automatically throughout the event. On the bottom panel, you will find a number of additional widgets and resources. If you're experiencing problems with the slides or audio, press the F5 key in Windows, Command+R on a Mac, or refresh your browser on mobile devices. Or you can close and relaunch the presentation. To control volume, adjust the master volume on your computer. If you have questions during this webinar, please type them into the QA box at any time during the webinar and click Submit button. At the end of the presentation, we will have time to respond to questions. This session is being recorded and will be archived. You will receive an automatic email notification when it becomes available. Today's presentation is What is Essence? By Ivar Jacobson and Roly Stimson. Ivar Jacobson received his PhD in computer science from KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. Ivar is a father of components and component architecture, work that was adopted by Ericsson and resulted in the greatest commercial success story ever in the history of Sweden. He is the father of use cases and objectory, which after the acquisition of Rational Software in 1995 resulted in the Rational Unified Process, a widely adapted method. It's also one of the 3 original developers of Unified Modeling Language. But all this is history. Ivar founded his current company, Ivar Jacobson International, which since 2004 has been focused on using methods and tools in a smart and agile way. This work resulted in that Ivar became the founder and a leader of a worldwide network, CMAT, which has the mission to revolutionize software development based on a kernel of software engineering. The kernel has been realized as a formal OMG standard called Essence. Roly has more than 30 years of experience in the IT industry as a practitioner, coach, and a change agent. Roly contributed to the development of Essence standard and has since authored many of the IGI's Essence-based practices and related cards and games. Roly is currently the product owner of the IGI's Essence toolset. I have personally known Ivar for more than a decade, and I've been actively supporting the CMAT initiative since its very first days. It's truly an honor to be here together with Ivar and Roly. Ivar and Roly, without further ado, please take it away.
Hello, everybody. We have had 2 previous seminars on Essence, and this is the last in the series of 3. In this seminar, we will present, make an overview and recapitulation of what we already have talked about. But the most important thing is that what we have spoken about in the previous seminars are just a part of what Essence can help with and provide and enable. In this seminar, we will fill in more of the abilities that Essence provides us with. And I will start with the overview here. First, Essence is a standard. It was taken in 2014. Before then, we had worked many years and tried out Essence on many different methods and used in client engagement. And so this is the first common ground we ever have had in software engineering since its beginning, which was 60 plus years ago. It's for engineering, and the engineering has two different aspects here, a technical and human. From a human technical perspective, Essence help us to guide the developer, the team, to do what it wants to do in using a modern user experience. We use poker-sized cards. We will show you that in a minute. It also focuses on what is really essential. The essentials of software engineering is what you really need. We define it basically as what you really need to be able to participate in teamwork. And that is much, much less than what an expert in any aspect has. So this makes it, by focusing on the essentials, makes it easy to learn and easy to apply the practices that are described using Essence. It has two components. It's a language and a kernel, which I will talk about next. On the human aspects, it is a thinking framework that help you to discuss and reason about what you're doing, the endeavor you participate in. It provides many opportunities for conversations and prompts you and the team to discuss issues related to the problem. It has numerous placeholders for conversations and also proposals for questions to be asked and space for asking more questions. What is very unique is that it sees software development as a set of serious interactive games. So in many aspects in software engineering, you need to reason and discuss within the team to get consensus on how to move forward. That empowers all members of the team. So from a technical aspect, Essence is a kernel and a language. The language is very simple. It's visual, it's intuitive, you learn it in just a few hours. And it's used to describe practices, methods, but also the kernel itself is described using this simple language. The kernel includes these things that you need to deal with when you develop software. The key things to work with, the key things to do, the key competences you need to really participate in an endeavor. In this aspect, the kernel is unique. It can be described like a domain model for the problem domain where you participate in when you develop software. The language is really simple. Every practice represented by a hexagon is described in terms of a number of elements. There are activities that the activity symbol look like activities always have looked, so it's really not something new. Activities progress the key elements that you want to progress. Namely, for instance, you need to, during the project, you need to progress the solution, the software system you're building, but also an understanding of what the system is going to do, the requirements. From the beginning, the requirements are not very well developed, but as time goes by, you understand more and more what the system is really going to do. And of course, when you deliver a product, you have a requirement specified. And the specification of a requirement and other products, other things you produce are work products. Work products describe these alphas. To do an activity, to perform it, you need a competency. And there are several different competencies in the kernel that are basic, that you need to have to develop software. And finally, the very useful mechanism, the pattern, is a generic mechanism for describing other elements such as alphas, work products, activities, and their relationship. We will show examples of it as we move on here. Here we have as an example one practice. Actually, it's Scrum Essentialized. It's developed in a collaboration between Jeff Sutherland and his company and people in my company. We have here a number, we represent the key the elements are represented on poker-sized cards. And that means the essentials of every element is described on that card. So starting from the left, a very useful element is the pattern. And we have here two examples of patterns being used. We have principles, for instance, the Scrum pillars, the Scrum values, self-organization, and how that is done through cross-functional teams. We have roles. So roles are patterns. A role describes what competencies you need to have. So we have Scrum team, we have Scrum master, product owner, and the development team itself. Then we have the activities, things to do. And these are the typical Scrum activities here, sprint retrospective, sprint review, etc. And the things to work with. The alphas of the key elements that you need to progress. So for instance, here we have a sprint is an alpha, product backlog item is also an alpha, and improvement is an alpha. These have to be progressed. For instance, improvement will progress through 3 states: identified, planned, and achieved. And these alphas are described through work products. So the sprint goal is a work product, the increment itself is a work product, etc. So these are the cards in Scrum Essentials, now being used by Jeff Sutherland in basically most of his training today when he teaches Scrum. It makes it more concise, more clear. The elements become very clear because they are represented on a physical card. Now, these cards don't need to be physical. They can also be electronic. For instance, we have developed tools that allow you to deal with these electronic cards. So the use of cards they work as placeholders for conversations. So every such card, when the team work, lay out the cards, they can discuss the content of the cards. The card is by itself not complete in any way, but it helps us to discuss what is on the card, so the team gets engaged. And the team itself agrees on the meaning of the text on the cards. So this is an old idea that we are using here, namely in Agile teams work with cards to show the progress of our work. And that has been incredibly popular, valuable for the team to stand in front of a board and discuss these tokens and how they move across the board. So we have used it not only for that, but also for learning and collaboration, making decisions in the team, tracking progress, and improving throughout the whole work. So here the essence kernel, this is the most important thing with the elements there. The alphas, they are 7 in the kernel, and they come from 3 different areas of concern. So we separate the customer area from solution area from endeavor area. In the customer area, we have 2 alphas. We have the opportunity, which is an opportunity that we want to address. And we have stakeholders who are interested in this opportunity, interested, fund it, use it, and benefit from a solution produced. In the solution area of concern, we have the software system. That is what we actually are aiming for. And that is what we'll run. But to get the software system that will be successful, we need to deal with what it's going to do, what are the requirements of the software system. And we need to make sure that the stakeholders are satisfied with what we're doing, and of course that it addresses an opportunity. Finally, we need the alphas for the actual endeavor. There is work to be done. There is a team of people. The team is also an alpha in that sense. When we start, we don't have members necessarily. We have only money, funding. And then we have the next state of the team is that we have identified what kind of people we need to have, and then we have identified the actual people, etc. And with people we grow, they will be collaborating, and from the beginning they're not collaborating very well, and then they will collaborate very well. And of course we need a way of working that really represents what the team is doing, and not only what the method they have said they would follow, because we know there may be a gap. Ideally, we want to bridge that gap or close the gap between the method that we want to use to be guided and the way we actually work. So here we have an example of alphas and their representation on cards. So the opportunity has 6 states. From the beginning, we just have identified an opportunity. Then we know that we have a solution. There is a solution needed, and we know that we can find a solution, and etc. Value is established, it's viable, and so on. For a software system, we need to get to a state first where architecture is selected, and then that we can demonstrate it, it's usable, etc. Each such state is specified by a number of criteria. So for instance, here we have the opportunity. It goes through 6 states. In the first state, for every state, there is a checklist. And to move from one state to another, we need to satisfy this checklist of a second state. This checklist measure real outcome, not activities done or documents produced, which means that these cards are generic. They are not. They are agnostic to any particular methodology being used. It can be used for any method. The kernel also includes, apart from the alphas, it includes activity spaces, which are types of activities that needs to be done. They are holders of things you want to do when you develop software, or have to do when you develop software. For instance, you always have to understand the requirements, you have to shape the system, etc. But the actual activity you're going to use is dependent on what practice you want to use. So, for instance, if you do use cases to specify the requirements, then you feel activities that are specific for use cases. If you use user story, we do something else. So these dashed arrows to the left will be filled by concrete activities, and they are dependent on which practice you select. You also need competencies, and in the kernel we have identified 5 different competencies, and each one of them has different levels of competencies. So you can, for instance, be a developer, have a development competency at up between level 1 to 5, and at the 5 you are basically an architect. So what is now Essence? Well, we have already said it's many things. It's a kernel, it's a learning aid, it's a language, it's lots of practices, it's a thinking framework, and it's some cards and card games. So we will now describe more of what it is. This is just fragments of what Essence is. This is what we have talked about so far. But let's now see and build out the picture. And over to you, Roly.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ivar, and thank you everyone for listening. So as Ivar has said, so far in the webinar series, we've given you some very high-level views of what Essence is, and also some little tasters of fragments of things that Essence can do. So far, we've really focused on how one team, for example, might get started by playing some games, which also means they're probably co-located. So for the rest of the presentation, we really want to fill out those fragments that we've talked about so far, to fill in the gaps and to complete the picture of everything that Essence is and everything that Essence can do. And we will do that both at the team level and at the organization level, because Essence operates at both those levels. And then finally, we'll step back and say, if we look at all the things that Essence is and that Essence can do for us across teams and across the organization, what it really represents is a whole new engineering paradigm, a whole new way of thinking about how we work as an organization and as teams to do engineering successfully. So first of all, we'll focus in the teams area. And in particular, we'll start to look at how we can use Essence for more than just preparing, as we've looked at so far. And we'll look at how we can use Essence to help drive everything that a team does and guide them and enable them to execute, to plan, and to track their work. And we will also look at how we can scale up its use from one co-located team to more complex environments where we might have many teams and they might be distributed teams. So first of all, as promised, we'll look at how we can actually use Essence and use the cards and use the games that we've already seen to drive the work of the team. And here I'm using a little bit of the kernel that you've already seen, which is some activity spaces within this endeavor space, as a thinking framework, which is one of the things that Essence is good at. To show that the games that we looked at in the previous seminar, in the second seminar, were games that really help us to prepare to do the work. So we looked at practice mapping, where teams can examine through the card games a practice, what all the elements are, how they relate to each other, and how we as a team might start to use those different elements. We also looked at contract bridge, where we could start to agree splits of responsibilities perhaps between a customer and a supplier, again, by playing card games. And finally, we looked at lifecycle layout, where we could start to decide what the key milestones might be that we need to progress through in a controlled way, again, using the cards. So now as we start to build the picture out, we'll find that we can use other games to help the team drive all the way through this space. And in particular, we'll look at a game called Objective Go, which enables us to coordinate the activity. And we will also look at other games like Practice Patience and Health Monitoring, which can really help support the team in doing the work and in tracking the progress and in adapting and replanning the work. So first of all, we'll look at Objective Go. What you can see here are the alphas that Ivar has already talked you through, and they are laid out top to bottom in terms of rows are the alphas, and then the cards within the rows are the state cards that Ivar has already shown you. And this is a pretty typical starting point. The team has initially got together and agreed where they are in terms of which states they've already achieved. And typically the team early on, will have at least identified an opportunity and maybe started to seed the team. So now we're at the point where the team is really starting to get together and say, right, what do we need to do as a team? So they can start to lay out the board and focus initially on what do we need to achieve next, because that should always be the primary focus. And now they can start to take all of the different cards that represent the progressions that they could make and look at each one and say, in this example, the opportunity. Is it important for us now, soon, next, to understand the value of the opportunity? That would involve getting ticked in all of these boxes, that we understand the value, we can quantify the value for the opportunity. We understand the impact of creating a solution in this space, and so forth. And if we decide, yes, it's very important that we get ticks in those boxes next, then we will put that into our Achieve Next column. And then we'll move on to look at all the other states that we could look to achieve next. And some will decide, yes, we do need to achieve next, and we will move them into that Achieve Next space of the board. Others will decide, no, that can wait until later. And we don't have to go into specifics there. We can just say later. But we might identify some things to the far right of the journey, which is really not part of the scope of our team to actually achieve. So, for example, we might not need to retire the software system or to close down the project. So the cards, again, can be very helpful to indicate in that way what the overall mission of this team is and where that mission actually ends. Now that we know what we need to achieve next, we can start to move the project forward. So now we will start to progress the items, using the cards, using the checkboxes to set short-term objectives, tick them off as we go, move them into the Achieve column as we get them done. So now you can see we've moved on to another game. We're actually doing health monitoring, which is about this continuous checking of what should we do next, have we done it, can we move it to achieved, and now what should we do next? And when we've reached the point where we've achieved what we really felt was the right next place to get the piece of work to, we can now move our thinking forward. So make room over to the left. And now we can say of all those things we said we could achieve later, now let's split out what are the things we need to achieve next as the next little step we're going to take versus others that can wait until later again. And so the process continues. So now again, we look at what we need to achieve next, we tick the tick boxes off and we achieve it. So how might that actually work in a real project? Well, if, for example, we're using a Scrum-like approach, The sprints within the Scrum, the time boxes, 2 to 4 weeks. So let's say we've got 2-week sprints. And at the beginning, it is natural for us to say, what do we want to achieve next? So that's where we would play Objective Go and say, what are the ticks that we need to get in what boxes during this sprint? And they then form part of the objectives for this sprint. So as well as getting some product backlog items done, we might also agree that we need to make some more progress in the opportunity space or the stakeholder space and set ourselves some very clear objectives to do that. And then at the end of the sprint, that's where we do the health monitoring to say, oh, what did we actually achieve? And on that basis, what might we want to achieve next? And we might also replay at this point a game that we saw in the second seminar, Practice Patience, which is really about saying, doing root cause analysis in terms of how are we working well, are we working the best possible way? And in particular, if we haven't made the kind of progress that we were hoping to, why might that be? Are there some practices that we should be using that we aren't using? Or are there some elements of the practices we are using that we're just not doing well at the moment? So these games together enable us, a team, to drive, as a thinking framework, the whole plan, do, check, adapt cycle that helps them drive their work through in an effective and controlled way. So next we will now look at what if there's more than one team and what if they're not co-located. If they are co-located, playing the games with the physical cards is by far the most effective way. It's highly interactive, highly visual, and it leaves behind a big picture of where we are, what we're doing, how we're doing. But if we're not co-located and if we're many teams, then we may want electronic tools to support us and to supplement the use of the cards. And here we're looking at the Practice Exchange tool. And what this enables an organisation to do is to make available to teams the practices and other assets which they can start to use, like Scrum Essentials or User Story Essentials or all the other practices. But what teams can also do is just create a team area for themselves. So far 4 teams have done that. Each one just has a team name and a brief description visible at this level. But if we drill into that team, we can now start to see more about that team. So the team can just describe themselves. But most importantly of all, they can say which practices they're using. So they can select from the set that's available to them. So this is actually a real example that I'm actually involved with, and it's an internal project within IGI. So when we got together, we set this up, said who's on the team, and agreed which practices we wanted to use. So we're a very small, very agile team, but it makes sense for us to use good agile practice like good product ownership, good management of the product backlog. We're using user stories to express the backlog. We work actually in weekly time boxes for us. And we do regular retrospectives. And you can also see that we have our own life cycle, which we'll see in a minute, and also that we're using the Essence kernel in a way that, again, we'll see in a minute. And just by selecting and combining those practices, what I get is a browsable view of all of the different elements that we're doing and how they all work together, all the activities, the alphas, the work products that we as a team are using, so that anyone at any time can understand exactly what the way of working is that we're doing, and potentially for governance purposes ask questions about why aren't you using other practices? Are there some gaps in your way of working? Another key thing that just selecting and combining these practices gives us is an electronic status board. And this, as we'll see in the next slide, is actually just an electronic version of the card games that we've seen already. But first, I also wanted to highlight another aspect of this team portal, which is that the team can localize their use of the practices. So as well as saying which practices I'm using, I can also say more about how we're using them, potentially with links to our artifacts like our Kanban board, for example. So in this case, we said, yes, we are going to use Essence. We are going to use that inspect and adapt approach that we've already talked about by regularly using the Essence checklists to make sure we know where we are and where we need to go next. And it is this electronic board which enables us to automatically capture that. This first view that you can get of the board is a view that is the same irrespective of which practices we're using or what, if any, life cycle we happen to be using. So this is completely method neutral, as Ivar called it. So this means that any stakeholder outside my team can say at any time, I don't care what practices you're using, let me come in and have a look and see where you are, how much you understand the opportunity. Have you yet got any stakeholders represented or involved? So that gives a very clear indicator of the progression state of our project. But if we drop down the life cycle box at the top, the team has elected to use the life cycle, then that will be visible. And when we choose to see it, we will see additional information. So we can still see where the team is. So the same alphas have been achieved or not achieved. But now we have the additional contextual information in terms of what the team said, in terms of what were the key progressions that they wanted to make. So we said initially we wanted a phase called discovery, and at the end of that we wanted to have a viable vision. And next we wanted to move into a development phase where we would have an initial milestone we called in the groove, where we would want things like our way of working to be working well and the work to be under control. And we can see that we're nearly there, but not quite. We haven't yet fully completed the work to select the architecture or indeed to look at the opportunity. And so now we can effectively open up the card by clicking on the icon, and we're shown exactly the same thing as if we were playing the physical games. We're shown a view of what the checks are, which checks are missing. But now, because it's electronic, we can also get more information, more description about the elements on the card. Or we can link through from the card into the practice to say, oh, if I want to get the opportunity to the state viable, what activities should we be doing as a team? And have we got a practice that helps us with those activities? And in that case, what specifically should we do next? So now we'll move on from looking at how Essence can be used by many teams, potentially distributed across the organization, to how Essence can be used across all the different teams at the organization level. And initially, we'll look at a challenge relating to governance, which is how do we keep control over a complete organization and have good organization level governance without dictating to different teams and projects how they have to work. So this is typically the challenge we face in this space. We are part of one organization, but we may be globally distributed. And we may have many different business units, product lines, teams, functions, etc. within the organization. We'll have many shapes and sizes of project, maybe some innovation projects, some research and development, some operational, some human resources, and they will have many different delivery models. Some might be developing a big new infrastructure piece. Others might be drip feeding new value, and so forth. And so typically across the organization, different approaches will rightly be being used to support those different types of project and different business lines. The governance challenge is how do we maintain a single cohesive view across all those different projects? And we need to do that so that we can ensure that projects that are going well and are revealing new investment opportunities, we can see them and we can take decisions to invest there. Or if other projects are not going well and seem to be hitting brick walls, then we can take decisions maybe to close those off and to divert our investments to places where we will get return from those investments. So we need a holistic view across all of those different things. And traditionally, a way in which organisations attempted to get that was to say, well, everyone needs to follow the same process. If you're all software development projects, there must be a process for developing software. We'll define what it is, or we'll buy somebody else's definition of what it is, and then we'll tell everyone that that's how they have to work. The challenge with this is that this is quite a famous quote. It's quite popular at the moment, often attributed to the founder and former CIO of Visa. And it says, if you give people complex rules, what that gives rise to is simple and stupid behavior. People will say, okay, you're telling me how to do my job. I'll turn my brain off. I'll just follow the steps you tell me to follow. And if it all goes wrong, it's not my fault, it's the fault of the process. And that's the last thing that we want in a knowledge organisation and in a creative and innovative organisation. What we need is simple, clear purpose and principles. And that will give rise to complex and intelligent behaviour, which is what we need. And so we get to so what we can say basically is a very simple, clear prescription, which is teams are responsible for their own way of working. But that includes ensuring that it is fit for purpose and visible. So we've already started to see how that can work. We can make available sets of practices to teams. This set of practices is a good set for doing team-level agile software development. And that will work well for some teams. Other teams might want a more continuous flow or Kanban approach, in which case they'll choose a slightly different set of practices. They won't use the time boxing practice, they will use the continuous flow practice. Other teams might put in additional practices to help them capture user stories well. So there will be practices in common. We're all part of the same organisation after all, but in different parts of the organisation, different subsets and different practices might be used. A small enhancements team might use a different set. A business change team might use a very different set. So they're not doing software development at all. So they certainly don't need the practices that are to do with development. They're not actually developing products, so they don't need the stuff to do with product backlogs. But they have seen the power of things like daily stand-up meetings and regular retrospectives and flowing things through a Kanban board. They actually quite like capturing things as little user stories in terms of cards, what they should do next. So they can elect to use those practices. So what we see is that every team can work in a way that is exactly right for them, but we naturally get commonality across the teams, which means that we can collaborate much better across those teams, and the stakeholders outside the teams can understand what the teams are doing and how they're working. And people too can easily move from one team to another and quickly pick up, oh, I understand how you're working, great, where do I start? And the other thing that this enables us to do is to scale up smoothly. So for example, if I just use those 7 practices at the team level, I can get a view automatically from the electronic tools as to what level of coverage that's giving me against the overall kernel framework. I can play card games to get these views, but if I'm using the tools, I get presented automatically. And in this case, you can see, well, I'm getting no help at all in the shape of the system space, so, and nothing to do with architecture or design, nor how to deploy or operate the system. And if we're a small agile team working on a simple problem, that might be fine. But maybe what we're doing is starting to scale up in complexity, and we're starting to hit challenges around the architecture and also around making releases. That's proving hard to do quickly and safely. So at that point, we can say, well, are there some other practices that can help us now that the problem we're facing is more complex? And there we might start to look at other practices to do with working agile at scale. But we don't need all of them, so we don't want to roll in a big at-scale framework that gives us loads of practices that helps teams of hundreds and hundreds of people to work together well. We're still only a small team, but we want some more help on architecture, and we want some more help on release management. So we can just slot those things in. And now we can automatically see what additional help and guidance that has plugged into the Essence framework. So now in the shape the system space, we're getting some help about how to evolve an architecture roadmap and use architecture spikes to evolve that. And how also we evolve our release strategy and how we clear the road to live so that we can go live in a smooth and controlled way. And how we evolve the architecture by preparing little bits of the architecture, sometimes called building the architecture runway. But still we have nothing in the operate space. That might be fine. That might be nothing to do with our team, or we might go back and say, are there any, is there a DevOps practice that can help us? Because now we're actually moving, becoming more of a DevOps team. So now we'll look in terms of the organization at how we can move from great teams doing great things in pockets to how the organization as a whole can continuously learn, which is absolutely critical for organizations, that they can evolve, they can get better, they can respond to changes in the market and new technology opportunities. So what the organization can do, as we've already seen, is make available a pool of practices which cover the kinds of things that the organization does across the different business lines and types of projects. They can even make those available as starter packs that may fit fairly well the typical types of projects we do, like a small Agile project starter pack or a big Agile project starter pack. So then when a team starts up, they can get going really quickly. They can say, okay, there are any starter packs that fit? Yes, we'll grab that and we'll start with that. Maybe they don't need all the practices in that starter pack, so they take a couple out, but maybe there's an extra practice that they need. So very quickly they can reuse the practices that are right for them. And then maybe that team also needs to innovate. Maybe they're the first team that's ever really got into microservices within the organization. So what they can now do is start to capture how they want to do that, express it using that very simple language. What new activities do we need? Any new alphas or work products? What new competencies? And then they can make that available back into the tool of practices. So now next time a microservices project comes along, the organization has a great set of practices which has been tried and tested in practice in our organization and is now available for other people to use. And that's often done through communities of practice. A community of practice, perhaps the architect that was working on the microservices practice will then say, okay, what I want to do now is really just refine that and make that available through the community of practice for other projects and teams to use. So if we really step back and look at everything that Essence is, we said, yes, it's all these things that we've talked about in the beginning, but now we've rounded out the picture and really said Essence is many, many things. It's a shared language, a common kernel. Those things together give us progress and health monitors. We can get access to shared industry practices like Scrum Essentials, User Story Essentials, and so forth. We can use games to prepare, to learn, to execute. We can use the selected practices to show how we're working and get clear visibility across teams about how we're working. We can scale our ways of working very smoothly, and at the organization level, we get common governance and an evolving knowledge base. And if we put all those things together, what we're really looking at is a whole new engineering paradigm. And to compare that and really explain what we mean by new engineering paradigm, we're going to compare it with some traditional paradigms. First of all, we'll start with the Holy Grail, which is, as its name suggests, maybe we never quite get there. But the Holy Grail would be that we are 100% the best possible across all these 6 key success factors. Maximum empowerment for teams, maximum responsive for our customer needs, maximum ability to collaborate as people and as teams, maximum transparency of how everyone is working and what they're doing and where they are, maximum alignment of teams around bigger goals to develop bigger products, and maximum learning at the organization level and at the individual level. So the first attempt really in the industry to achieve these different factors was through prescriptive process, which really said everyone learns this standard way of doing software development. So in theory, we all learn how to develop software, and we get good alignment, transparency, collaboration, because everyone is using the same approach. But we lose in empowerment because the team is being told how to work. And we also lose in responsiveness because this way of working will be exactly right for no project, and it will be really wrong for many projects. So what happens in practice is that teams tend to declare independence and say, we could follow that practice, but actually we need to deliver some value to our customers. So they empower themselves a bit under the covers to be a bit more responsive, but they're still really constrained by the process. And as a result, we lose out massively in the collaboration, transparency, alignment space because everyone in theory is following the process, but how people are working in practice is just no longer visible or understandable. So Agile came along as a new paradigm and said, empowerment is key. Empower the teams. The rule is no one should tell the teams how to work. And that obviously gives many, many, many critical advantages. It enables us to be more responsive, but actually sometimes we're slowed down a bit by continuously debating how should we work, reinventing our processes from scratch. And we certainly lose out in terms of visibility. So from the outside in, it's sometimes hard to understand how this team's working and how teams can work together. And as an organization, if a team is great, how do we learn from that? How do we spin up 5, 6, 7, 8 more great teams? So Essence in Practice really aims to maximize our ability to operate across all of these factors. The key, as we've seen, is organizational learning, that the organization just gets better and better and better over time. Actually, we increase responsiveness because teams can get going very quickly using the practices that are right for them and just filling out the details in terms of how they're going to use them. And we get really good collaboration, transparency, and alignment because the set of practices that people are using bear a lot of relationships to the set of practices that all the other teams are using. And empowerment is very high too, because the teams can select the practices, can adapt the practices, and can innovate new practices. So, bottom line is, welcome to the future, a whole new paradigm and way of doing software engineering, which I hope we've shown you in how that works in practice at every level, from small teams playing with cards to large organizations with ever-evolving knowledge bases, which help them to be successful as an organization.
Thank you, Ivar and Roly. Let's go for the questions now. Our first question comes from Sarah.
Well, before you do that, let's make clear that we are most interested in getting any kind of comments and feedback, and we would love you to tweet about it and do whatever needed. So you can contact us. My email address is very easy, ivar@ivarjacobson.com. You can also find on our website things that may be of interest. But we would really love to hear back from you. Thank you. Thank you, Pekka.
All right, let's go for the questions from Sarah. We have a question. How do you introduce teams to Essence? Suppose they aren't doing Agile at all, or suppose they're already doing Scrum?
Do you want me to take that, Ivar?
Yes.
That's an ideal situation for using Essence. So if they know Scrum, then you can come in with the Scrum cards and use the practice patience game to say, let's just check amongst ourselves. Have we all got the same understanding of what great Scrum looks like? Are we doing all of it equally well? Or are there some areas which maybe, have fallen through the cracks and we've forgotten about, and now we're doing less well or even not doing at all? And you can just lay out the cards And that really, the key thing is that gets the discussion going. And people say, oh, sprint goals, yeah, we don't do that. Why did we stop doing that? And didn't we have a sprint last time when we got to the end and we'd done all of the backlog items, but it turned out we hadn't really met what the product owner really wanted us to do. So that's absolutely the ideal place to start, is get the team together, break out the pack of cards, and start to play some simple games to get the team to discuss what they're doing well, what they're doing less well, and what they should change so that they start to do things better.
Thanks, Roly. Next question comes from Robert. He asked, how are dependencies between teams represented in essence? That is, one team's output is need as an input for other teams, etc.
So not really represented in any formal sense within Essence, but what Essence always gives you is that thinking framework so that you can start to explore what kind of dependencies do we have, in what spaces are those dependencies. Is it in terms of the requirements, or is it in terms of the physical solution, or is it in terms of the team? Have we got dependencies, some people are shared across the team, and so we're getting some resource conflicts. Or is it in terms of the stakeholders? Basically, Essence gives you the framework for asking questions about what kinds of dependencies do we have, but nothing too formal in terms of actually mapping those dependencies. That would be done by a practice that helps you to do that.
Thank you, Roly. Next question is from Detlef, and he asked, with regard can a set of achieved cards be a milestone?
Sorry, I missed the middle bit of that. Can what sort of cards?
I think he's after the idea that you have you define a milestone by specifying what state each alpha is in. Yes, the answer is that's how we do it.
All right, let's move on to Glenn's question. How does Essence deal with bug fixes?
So there is, within the Essence specification, there are some standard extensions to the kernel, which are things which are very often useful, but not necessarily always. And there is in there an alpha called a bug, which is specifically designed to help track defects. And it has a very simple defined life cycle and the usual other support in terms of additional description about what bugs are and how best to manage them. So that's the main way in which Essence again provides the framework for you to start to discuss bugs, how you want to manage them, how you need to progress them.
Thank you, Roly. Next comes from Vladimir. Is it possible to learn, use, deploy Essence without to know what its use cases? Without to know what its use cases are?
So yes, very much. There is a use case 2.0 essentials practice, which is expressed with Essence, but you can use the Essence kernel independent of any practices, including the use case practice, and indeed you can express any practice that you like with Essence. So daily stand-ups, Scrum, and some teams will use Scrum essentials and not use use cases at all, and they're still kind of using the power of Essence, yeah. So no, the two are very much independent, but work well together.
Thank you, Roly. I'm afraid we have run out of time today. I'd like to thank you, Ivar and Roly, again for their informative presentation and insightful answers to the many questions. Special thanks to each of you for taking time to attend and participate in today's webinar. This webinar is recorded and will be made available online in a few days at SIGSOFT's website. You can find announcements on upcoming ACM and SIGSOFT webinars and other ACM activities at learning.acm.org and www.sigsoft.org. On the behalf of SIGSOFT, the speakers and myself, thanks again for joining us, and I hope you will join us again in the future. This concludes today's webinar.